Hello there, my name's Raymond Taylor. I live in Wamsutter, Wyoming. I'm a victim of the MK Ultra and non-consensual experimentation, direct energy weapons of torture, and soft kill weapons of assault. I have an important message for you all, and I hope that you will further watch this clip. We come from great nations. We cannot forget who we are or where we come from. We cannot forget our histories past, nor the histories past of other nations. Many have risen to power only to be destroyed. We all come from a great race of people, and within time and technology comes a great responsibility for everyone, and for the prosperity of mankind and humanity. If we are to make this leap into the future, being the best that we can be, again in the namesake of humanity. To forget our histories past is to forget who we are, as well as where we come from. And we also lose the greatness within our people. And we are doomed to repeat the mistakes of nations past. This can all be avoided. We are strongest when we all stand together united, and we are weakest when we're all torn apart. We need to all embrace the future as one, striving with the balance of prosperity and humanity. Let us not forget, and let us move forward with hopes of prosperity and balance, with liberty for all. Please watch this.
Ancient icons are ripped from the walls and burned. In 1928, Stalin began the systematic elimination of all private business. In 1929, he collectivizes the farms, taking over ownership of all land and everything on it. The farmers revolt, slaughtering more than half of the nation's livestock, rather than surrender it to Stalin. The country faces a devastating famine. Stalin retaliates and imprisons or exiles millions. He becomes obsessed with the fear of losing power. Quotas are set up for each region, one for exile, another for execution. Millions of innocent Russians die. In 1936, Solzhenitsyn graduates from high school with honors. His admission to the prestigious Rostov University is assured. He's already convinced he will someday be a writer.
He realized that his love of literature could actually get him into trouble, because some of the authors that he liked, Dostoevsky for instance, were on the Soviet index. They were not approved of or republished. And he, being extremely talented in the sciences as well, he decided that it would be better if he pursued math and physics as a way of building a career.
At Rostov University, Solzhenitsyn becomes close friends with Nicholas Vukeyevich, with whom he spends hours discussing politics and their shared disdain for Stalin, who both feel has compromised the noble principles of Marx and Lenin. His first year at the university, Alexander meets Natalia Reshtevskaya, fellow student and a gifted pianist. They are married in a civil ceremony in the Rostov City Registry Office. That same year, Stalin invades the Baltics, adding the nations of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania to the Soviet constellation. The next spring, June 22, 1941, Hitler breaks his treaty with Stalin and invades Russia. Stalin orders out every able-bodied man who is not already on the front. Solzhenitsyn is eager to be part of the army defending the motherland. After a hurried course of study, Alexander is given the rank of second lieutenant and dispatched to the front. In July and August 1943, Solzhenitsyn takes part in the defense of Kursk. receives the Order of the Patriotic War for his bravery on the field of battle. In his spare time, he corresponds with his college friend Nicholas Vikevich. In their letters, both men share their disdain for Stalin, whom they blame for corrupting the true vision of Lenin for a socialist utopia. Their letters will prove to be their undoing. January 1945. The war has turned against the Nazis. Russia and the Western Allies are preparing for their final advance on the heart of Germany. On the morning of February 9th, Alexander is told to report to the general's office near the front. When he arrives, to his surprise, he is greeted by officers of Stalin's secret police. He is under arrest. He has no idea why.
Solzhenitsyn was arrested on the basis of some correspondence that he had with his school friend, Nicholas Vikevich, and they talked about the revolution after the revolution, which would be the one that they were interested in. And this was the basis on which they were arrested.
Alexander is marched for 2 days across 45 miles to the nearest railway station, to the dreaded Lubyanka prison in the bowels of KGB headquarters. Solzhenitsyn's long ordeal begins in the Russian network of prisons that will become known as the Gulag Archipelago. He is repeatedly ordered to strip naked for body searches. He is shaved of all body hair. Interrogations are ordered at all hours of the day or night. No torture is out of bounds if it will wring a confession. Alexander learns that his seditious writings will cost him the next 8 years. By Stalin's standards, it is a light sentence. Solzhenitsyn is repeatedly transferred from one prison to another, where he meets all kinds of prisoners, though very few would be considered criminals anywhere else. Many are doctors, lawyers, teachers, priests, scientists, professional people of all kinds, anyone with the courage or indiscretion to speak the truth. Spring 1946. A world away in the United States, Britain's wartime hero Winston Churchill pays a visit and makes a speech carried live on radio to the American public. It is a warning and a wake-up call to the West. In it, he mentions something called an Iron Curtain.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent.
But there are rumors that the Soviets have constructed special prisons for scientists to work on research projects. They are called Shiraskas, and living conditions are reportedly better. Solzhenitsyn fills out a form listing his occupation as atomic physicist. The lie works. In July 1946, he is assigned to the Shiraska at Marfino. The prison is actually housed in a former seminary across the street from a vast park in the heart of Moscow. The rumors were true. It is better here. Solzhenitsyn knows enough to be useful. His lie is never found out. Marfino tests his philosophical loyalties. Slowly, Solzhenitsyn begins to change on the inside. Solzhenitsyn will later describe his change.
I began to move ever so slowly toward a position that was idealist, supporting the primacy of the spiritual over the material, and secondly, patriotic and religious. In other words, I began to return slowly and gradually to all my former childhood views.
In 1947 and 48, Natalia is permitted 3 visits to her husband. She tells Alexander that the company where she works has been declared classified by the Soviets. Background checks on all the employees are bound to reveal their marriage. She proposes a divorce, so she can write unmarried on the forms. Solzhenitsyn is hurt, but he accepts. Natalia ultimately gets fired anyway on some other security pretext. Solzhenitsyn and his colleagues have it better than most prisoners because Stalin needs them. He is desperate to reach military parity with the West. September 1949, the weapon he wants most, he finally gets. The Soviet Union is now a viable threat to the West. The Cold War is heating up. The communists will invest as much as 70% of their annual budget on military defense at the expense of everything else. It will make them a superpower, but it will ultimately destroy the empire. For now, there is more good news. China has fallen to the communists. The Soviet propaganda machine wastes no time in trumpeting the inevitability of world domination. Beneath the surface image of a contented and progressive Soviet empire, millions continued to live in abject poverty and ignorance. Stalin's purges of his enemies is unrelenting, though now carried out in secret. In May 1950, Solzhenitsyn's increasing attitude of indifference to his jailers results in his removal from the Shirastka. He is reassigned to Siberia, the perfect setting for the most austere and cruel of Stalin's concentration camp system. Millions of innocent Russians are enslaved here. Most do not survive the ordeal. Sentences are often extended for petty reasons to make sure they never come back. Within Solzhenitsyn now burns the fire of a visionary. He feels he has a mandate to tell the story of Russia's tragedy in the 20th century, to expose the lie of communism. To write down his thoughts would be to sign his own death warrant. Instead, he memorizes hundreds upon hundreds of pages of text, the countless stories of other prisoners, many of whom have already died in this place of hell. To those who tell him their tales of suffering, Solzhenitsyn feels he has a debt to repay their trust that he will expose the truth. On February the 9th, 1953, 8 years to the day since that fateful morning on the Russian front when he was arrested, Alexander Solzhenitsyn is released from prison. But Alexander is not released from the Soviet tentacles of power. He must remain in this remote part of the empire and is not permitted to travel. By day, Solzhenitsyn teaches mathematics in a local school. By night, and in every waking hour he is alone, the once devoted follower of Lenin now labors over the manuscripts that will someday tell the world of his own suffering and that of countless others. He is determined to repay his debt to their memory. On March the 6th, 1953, Joseph Stalin dies. His successor, Nikita Khrushchev, charts a different course. In February 1956, Khrushchev delivers what will be later called his secret speech to the 20th Congress of the Soviet Communist Party. In it, he firmly denounces the crimes of Joseph Stalin. The speech sets the stage for a declaration of amnesty for millions of former prisoners. Solzhenitsyn is now free to live anywhere in the country. As Alexander continues his public job as a math and physics teacher, his writing takes on a new urgency. He completes drafts of several future works, but it is the semi-autobiographical story of a single day in the life of a Gulag prisoner in a labor camp in Siberia that is destined to change Solzhenitsyn's life and begin his public war against the Soviet Empire. It will ultimately be called One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. The manuscript is finished in 1959, but Alexander keeps it a secret. The Soviet Union is undergoing tremendous ferment and change, but change is not what the communist leaders want. Since World War II, they have effectively maintained a barrier to the West and its decadent influence, except in one place. East and West Berlin remain a haven for the exchange of ideas and cultures. People freely move from one side to the other. On August 13th, 1961, that changes. Overnight, the border is closed, first by armed guard, then barbed wire, and finally by an imposing brick wall. Thousands try to escape in the first weeks, their images on Western television only adding to the conviction of many that the Soviet Union is the archenemy of freedom. That December, a trusted friend takes Solzhenitsyn's one-day manuscript to the one publisher they think might have the courage to print it. But will they?
When it came out, I talked to people afterwards. The moment it hit the streets, it was gone in an instant.
Those that were loyal to communism were outraged at the suggestion, that communism could be depicted in such a brutal way. But of course, many others, and not least those that had suffered in the Gulag, were absolutely had a sense of elation and liberation that someone had actually given testimony to this sort of suffering that had gone on, sort of hidden under the carpet of Stalinism.
Freedom is not to grab and take as much as possible from neighbors or from somebody else. Feelings have been given us for freedom. But God gave us freedom of choice. Before my exile, I wrote that freedom consists of being able to act and to think independently from external pressures and external enemies. That is freedom. In the Gospel it says, understand truth, and truth will make you free. This is fascinating.
By 1963, royalties from one day enable Solzhenitsyn to become a full-time writer. He is granted membership in the exclusive Soviet Writers' Union. But in the inner circles of power, the Solzhenitsyn star has already started to fall. Permission to publish his expansive autobiography, The First Circle, is denied. His publisher refuses his novel Cancer Ward, convinced by now that the writer is less of a literary asset and more a political liability. Secretly, he is writing feverishly on a new manuscript. It will reach 1,500 pages. It is Solzhenitsyn's searing indictment of the entire Soviet system. It is called the Gulag Archipelago.
Former prisoners from all over the Soviet Union began sending him their stories. Some of them were well-written works, some of them were amateurish reminiscences. And Solzhenitsyn reached the conclusion that it was his duty to gather these things and put them into print.
In 1968, the overseas publication of The First Circle and Cancer Ward causes a firestorm among the Soviet literary establishment. The next year, Solzhenitsyn is expelled from the Soviet Writers' Union. Ironically, 1 year later, on October the 8th, 1970, he is notified that he has won the Nobel Prize for Literature. But fearing he would not be allowed back in the country, he does not attend the award ceremony. Then in September 1973, the KGB arrests one of Solzhenitsyn's trusted copyists, who breaks down under pressure to reveal the hiding place of a copy of the Gulag Archipelago. Once in their hands, its searing indictment of Soviet totalitarianism seals Alexander's fate. Meanwhile, he has already given permission for its publication overseas. By December, it is on the streets of New York and London and causing an international sensation. Solzhenitsyn must be removed from the Soviet public. He will be exiled to the first country who agrees to take him. Germany lets it be known they will welcome the writer if he is expelled from his homeland. On February the 12th, 1974, KGB officers burst into the Solzhenitsyn apartment in Moscow. He is arrested, taken to the same prison where he began his incarceration years before. He is stripped, searched, and the next morning dressed in a suit and taken to an awaiting Aeroflot plane, departing for Frankfurt. A month later, he is joined by the rest of his family. He finally settles in the United States, in a comfortable home in rural Vermont, where from 6 in the morning till 9 o'clock at night, he writes, 7 days a week, without stopping. He is working on his ultimate literary masterpiece, his epic of 20th century Russia that he had dreamed of writing as a teenager, The Red Wheel.
Solzhenitsyn gets out, he now can publish not just his novels, not just The First Circle and Cancer Award, he can publish Gulag. And I credit Gulag being that bomb, being the dynamite that blew away the ideological justification for that system.
Solzhenitsyn openly declares that he believes he will return to Russia in his own lifetime. No one believes him. In the face of the recent fall of Vietnam and Indochina to communism, and the seemingly increasing power of the Soviet Union, it seems an absurd assertion. Throughout the republics, the Soviet world remains a world of mass illusion, in which the individual is inseparable from the whole, and no one has meaning on their own. But the Soviet world is about to change. 3 leaders from the old guard die in quick succession. Brezhnev in '82, Andropov in '84, Chernenko in 85. They are replaced by a leader from a new generation who seems to understand. Mikhail Gorbachev declares the Soviet world can only be transformed with the full participation of the people.
Хотим, чтобы так у нас шло в стране, чтобы люди наши активно принимали участие во всех делах, которые касаются и коллектива, и страны.
Gorbachev envisions an enlightened communist world. Others have a different view of the future. Copies of Solzhenitsyn's works smuggled back into the country and excerpts broadcast over Radio Free Europe are helping to stir the undercurrent of yearning for freedom within Russia and the republics. In 1988, there is ethnic unrest in the Baltic republics. In Hungary, new leaders began to dismantle the old political system, even allowing people to take down sections of the Iron Curtain. In 1989, the Catholic-supported Solidarity movement in Poland forces the government to hold free elections, ousting the communists from power. In October, East Germans demonstrate to be free from the wall. It comes down and the city is once again whole. In December, Bucharest explodes in a revolt against the communist dictator Ceausescu. When the army deserts him, he and his wife flee the city. In March 1990, Lithuania declares its independence from the Soviet Union. The hardliner communists have had enough. On August the 18th, 1991, they attempt to overthrow the Gorbachev government and replace it with an old-style Soviet power.
Мы имеем дело с правым реакционным антиконституционным переворотом.
The coup backfires, largely because of a popular politician named Boris Yeltsin, who called for the people to let their will be known. They do, and the communists step down. In August, Gorbachev resigns as head of the Communist Party. On December 25th, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics is dissolved. The hammer and sickle flag is lowered from the Kremlin for the last time. In its place rises the white, blue, and red banner of the Russian Federation.
That communism in Russia would end, I was convinced after my first years in jail in 1945 through 46. I met so many people in the camps there. They made it obvious to me that communism was doomed.
By now, the charges that once caused Solzhenitsyn's expulsion have been dismissed, and the sentence of exile rescinded. It is time for Russia's greatest living author to come home. He does. It is almost impossible to imagine the miracle that took place in the Soviet Union in 1991. The miracle that Solzhenitsyn helped to make happen. The greatest empire of the Eastern Hemisphere was thrown down. Its despotic rulers replaced with those who stood for the rights and dreams of the people. All over the Soviet Union, people tore down the symbols of an ideology that had shaped so much of the 20th century. And they put their hope in new ideas and in the power of the individual over the might of the whole. But there is no doubt that the voice of truth from this one man proved more powerful than all the military might of the Soviet Empire.